Hello, my friends. Lori Ashcraft here again. I'm your host for Viva la Evolution, which is produced by Recovery and Resilience Solutions and sponsored by Crestwood Behavioral Health. And today I have a really wonderful, provocative, interesting guest, and most of you already know him, Dr. Ken Minkoff. And, most people know Ken for the amazing lifelong contribution he's made to the field of co-occurring disorders. And I think the first time I ever heard Ken speak at a conference, it was on that very topic. And I was kind of standing in the back because I couldn't get a seat. And I thought, well, I'm not going to stay very long because I don't want to stand up here this long. But I stayed the whole time because I couldn't leave because it was just too interesting. So Ken's going to talk with us about organizations today. And he has the way he looks at organizational consulting is he starts from the person being served and says, what does this person need? And then looks at building an organizational structure that supports that. He'll tell you that much better than I'm bumbling around right now with, but that's the idea. Just to kind of get your mind in the right place. Then I want to read this quote to you. I brought this whole thing up about paperwork and documentation because this is the first thing people tell me in organizations. We hate the paperwork. We didn't go to school to do paperwork. Blah, 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 documentation, auditors, blah, blah, blah. So here's what Ken has to say. And he's saying, he's on our side. He doesn't like it either, the way it's being done. He says, here's what your good staff are going to say. They're going to say, in relationship to documentation, they're going to say, instead of giving me tools that inspire me and those I serve, you give me tools that suck the soul out of my brain. And then I'm supposed to do good work. And what I'm getting rewarded for is being really good at soul sucking. So, that, I got your attention, huh? Yeah, you like that? I did too. So let's listen to Ken. Yeah, trying to think if I should tell you anything else, but I think he'll do a good job at that. So without any further ado, let's bring Ken on and see what he has to say. Here we go. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today. I know what your schedule looks like, and I'm just so grateful that you found a little time to chat with us. And people know you mostly, I think, for the amazing work you've done with co-occurring. I remember the first time I saw you was at a conference. I'm going to say it was 20 years ago or more. And you were so engaging and so inspiring. I was getting ready to walk out of the room and I couldn't go. So, I know that work you do. But I also know that you work with organizations at many levels, like the ground level, but also the very top, all in the interest of creating the best possible setting for good services to take place. Could you talk a little bit about maybe the organizational consulting you do and how that plays into all the service kind of things you work for?
Yeah, and first of all, let me say that I am not only grateful but honored that you've asked me to participate in your podcast. I look at you as someone who is always in the business of inspiring people to have the highest level of hope and capacity. People who have lived experience, people who are receiving services, but also people who are system leaders. And so the fact that you've asked me to join you in this podcasting endeavor is an honor indeed.
Oh, thank you. Thank
you. So, there's always in my mind a connection between how an organization functions at all levels and the mission and the values and the purpose of service delivery in relationship to its customers. And, I said that in a broad kind of way, because part of the way I think about it has to do with any organization that has customers. But this is particularly important in behavioral health because our customers are arguably the most vulnerable customers of any service delivery system that you're going to encounter. And yet, in spite of that, unfortunately, over the years that I've been involved in this field, behavioral health organizations, behavioral health systems generally, while people are very articulate and passionate about the values that we all have at all different levels of these organizations, the way in which organizations and systems are structured has become increasingly divergent from what good organizational culture, service, structure, process for serving vulnerable customers and particularly inspiring vulnerable customers should be. And so this in the work that, in my work originally setting out to be teaching people about how to serve people with co-occurring mental health and substance disorders, using an integrated recovery framework, it quickly became clear that you couldn't just teach people how to do this work out of the organizational context in which they were providing those services.
Right.
In fact, if you try to teach people, hey, I've got a cool new thing for you to learn to do, and the organization that you work in doesn't support it,
right, yeah.
Then that learning quickly extinguishes, and the result is actually more frustrating than if you hadn't even tried.
Yeah, there's no
so right from the
to hold it.
Yeah, so right from the beginning, my wife and partner, Dr. Chris Klein, we, in the work we've done together as Zia partners, that organizational culture change goes hand in hand with the content of service delivery for people with co-occurring mental health and substance needs, but increasingly also in other ways for other kinds of complex populations, crisis systems, integrating health and behavioral health, people with intellectual disabilities, people in the criminal justice system, people with, housing challenges, the whole gamut of potential possibilities, all of which have to be matched by how you organize your organization, both to deliver the service and then also the process of moving from wherever you are to achieve that result. Yeah. And let me just add one more thing, because I know you have another question teed up in your mind, and it's coming right out your mouth. But I had to learn a lot of this stuff about organizational change on the fly, if you will, because I never had any formal training in organizational development or organizational change. And I became a manager. I became essentially the chief executive officer of a mental health center 2 years after I completed my residency. And I had good clinical vision and ideals, but I really had no idea how to actually operate an organization and how to manage people effectively. Yeah. And a lot of my values were kind of countercultural, counter-hierarchic. So those were good values in some ways, but actually got in the way of my understanding how organizations actually function and why hierarchies are important, when you're working with employees. There's a relationship there, and that you have to understand how to work within that relationship to be successful. Yeah. And so in the process of learning the strategies for being a successful manager myself, without losing my core values, I also became aware that there's a whole organizational literature about how to do this. So, I was kind of making things up, but then I encountered organizational technology, if you will, organizational science that gave my thinking more weight. And I learned even more from Chris, who actually had formal business training. And so that we built on that in our approaches to working with both organizations and systems.
I'm so glad you shared that. I think that's what makes you so good at what you do is you didn't start with the organization. You started with good values, a commitment to the people we serve, encountered these things called organizations and had to figure them out while holding on to those values.
Well, I think that you really hit the nail on the head with that, because I think that's one of the biggest dilemmas in the field. Okay. And I mean, I agree with you in terms of my own self-assessment. One of my strengths is that I have a commitment to do everything in accordance with my values, whether I'm working with an individual client or I'm working with an organization or I'm consulting to a system. And especially when it's not easy to do, which means that you have to challenge yourself when you're confronted with conflict. Like, here's the world wanting me to do something. If we go down that path, it's going to get in the way of what we're trying to do. Yeah. And we can't completely ignore the rest of the world. They regulate us and license us and pay us and whatever. So how do we go about this? How do we do the very best to uphold our values? Mm-hmm. And what's happened in the field actually has been the opposite. Okay, so I've been constantly challenging myself to figure this out. And what I've learned, having done this for such a long time, is that you always can figure something out. Okay, and that's a bold statement, but you always can figure something out. You may not always be able to figure out how to deal with very toxic individuals successfully, but from the organizational and system standpoint, you can always figure something out that creates the best way of representing the values in services and with the whole organization, all the people who work there and everything else, even in the face of external challenges that are quite difficult. If you're determined to do it, and if you take the time to really think about it and explore it, both as a leader or as a consultant, as a leader, or, in most organizations, ideally to do it as a team with all the people involved. But in my trajectory, a lot of the effort in behavioral health has gone the other way. And I can remember when this started out. When I started out in behavioral health, it was in the 70s. And I was a state employee working for a community clinic in Cambridge, Somerville. And we were all a big bunch of touchy-feely hippies back then. And, we didn't have productivity requirements. We didn't bill anything. It's like, we charged the clients $1, if for showing up, and they could pay it or not, as the case may be. And then we used that to buy, snacks. I mean, that's what we did. And that was in 1976. 2 years later, they did a Medicaid transformation in behavioral health in Massachusetts that allowed clinics like ours to bill and retain Medicaid. So that was a great big windfall. But then we had to learn third-party billing and all the requirements of third-party billing. Yeah. And right about that time, moving into the 80s, a lot of the energy in behavioral health was, well, we're not touchy-feely, funky, organizations anymore just taking care of people. We're businesses now. And we all have to learn to be businesses. Not just like effective organizations, but businesses. And the way that was taught was that being a business meant something other than being touchy-feely, warm and fuzzy, caring about people. It meant being a business. You know, you had to be hard ass. You had to expect things of your employees and beat them up when they didn't do it. And you had to really, you know, because we're behavioral health, we don't know how to be businesses. And now we have to learn how to be businesses. So the culture that was then was like, oh, that old thing we were doing where we cared about people, we have to get rid of that. I mean, we can hold on to it, you know, but we have to build a structure around being a business.
Yeah.
And then progressively, and what I've seen, and I'm not saying that people do this on purpose, but it's become the culture in the system in a number of different ways. And better managers, I mean, I'm not saying, you know, just for out in the world, I know there are some brilliant, wonderful, lovely people running organizations out there who have countered this tide. But what I'm talking about is more of a trend in the system in general, is that there's this sense that there's a dichotomy. There's like, you have to be a business, but somehow, because we're all really good people, we're going to hold on to our values anyway. And as soon as you go down that path, mentally, as an organization, as a leader, as a system, and anybody listening, you know, think about this in your mind, then you're in trouble. Because what you're essentially saying is our organization is going to create a structure that's about revenue generation, performance, compliance, you know, meeting our CARF requirements, meeting our JACO requirements, never getting dinged, blah, 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 blah. Our employees all have to do that. They have to focus on their documentation. We have to get the perfect electronic health record. We have to transmit all of our data to wherever it needs to be transmitted. But don't worry, we're going to do good work anyway.
Yes, that's the thing. Anyway, in spite of.
In spite of. And so your really good staff is people don't sign up to say, hey, I went to be a social worker or a peer support worker or a case manager so I could fill out endless electronic health record data checks and fill out treatment plan forms to meet Medi-Cal compliance or Medicaid compliance, whatever state you happen to be in. Yeah. And that's not why I'm doing this. I came into this to help people. If I wanted to go make a lot of money somewhere doing weird stuff, I would have gone into real estate or, you know, finance, or, you know, I would have been a car mechanic. I don't care. But I came to help people. And what you're asking me to do, and I'm a good sport, and I'll do all this stuff you're asking. But what really gets me frustrated is when my job of helping people feels like I'm working around what the organization is giving me to do. Yeah. Instead of giving me tools that help me feel inspired, you give me stuff that sucks the soul out of my brain. Yes. And then somehow I'm supposed to do good work. Yeah. And what I'm rewarded for is being really good at soul-sucking activities.
I know. That'll get you a performance evaluation.
Right. So right. And what's painful, you know, kind of when we work with organizations, is how unconscious people are about this. I mean, when I was doing this, when I was actually running an organization, I mean, I spent a fair bit of time, like, you know, because we had to deal with, like, Medicaid is going to come in. We have to write treatment plans. You know, we have to do this documentation for Medicare and this thing for CARF and this thing for JACO and blah, blah, blah. You know, there's all these requirements. But my job as a leader is like, how do we do this in a way that actually makes sense? Yeah. Yeah. How do we create the right environment, values, instructions, policies, procedures that support what we most believe in? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then let the external stuff, you know, take care of itself in the way that's least onerous, rather than the first thing that we do is build ourselves out around what everybody else cares about. Yes. And never take care of our own stuff. Go ahead, Lori.
Something I learned from Chris, your lovely wife and my dear friend, is we always hear people complaining about the paperwork. And I complain about it too. I think it's way over the top. And it doesn't help. But let's just take paperwork, for example. What I've heard Chris say is there is a way to do the paperwork when it's actually therapeutic. So if I sit down and I just make up a bunch of stuff to fill out the paperwork, and then, I get an A because everything was right, that's not the way. Uh, that's when paperwork doesn't work. But if I sit down with the person and we walk through the paperwork together, and they're giving me whatever they want to have filled in, I mean, then we're both learning something about each other.
Exactly.
Grounds for a
Well,
relationship.
yeah. And let me take it one step further, even than that, because that's a technique for doing paperwork in a collaborative way. That's nice. But just in terms of the spirit of what organizational consulting can look like when you're thinking about how do you, part of the message always is there's a particular, so if we're coming in as consultants, there's a particular thing that we're being asked to help them with. And whatever it is, we want them to develop a set of services and then the structure to support that service delivery. That's in the context of, welcoming, hopeful, inspired, integrated services for people with co-occurring mental health and substance needs, or, whatever the challenge is, culturally fluent, trauma, all the jargony stuff. How do we design things that are actually inspiring and helpful to the people we're serving, and inspiring and helpful for the staff that we're trying to help them? Okay, so here's a starting place. Okay, and it's based on this whole idea that we know is like pay yourself first, or pay yourself forward, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I ask people, because you brought up paperwork.
Yeah.
If no one in the world required you to write anything down, and we don't write anymore, we document in electronic health records. Right. If nobody in the world required you to document anything, what would you write?
Oh, that's such a good question.
Right. And everybody, the first response, and you can ask this at any level of an organization, any level of the team. And people will like, nothing, I said, so there's no purpose in the document. The only reason that you do any of these things is because the Medicaid payers want you to, or the state regulators want to. Okay. And they, for the first minute, they'll go, yes. And so I say, so first of all, there's a conceptual problem right there, because you tell your clients all the time, don't organize your recovery process around people, places, and things that are outside of you. Build your own recovery process to take care of yourself. But how can we help people do that if we're not doing it ourselves?
Yeah.
Because if everything we build is only built with the idea that we're doing it for someone else, then what we've created in our own organizational architecture is a values vacuum. And the only thing that gets sucked into the vacuum is things that other people care about. So we spend our whole lives performing for external regulators and we never build anything. That would be about taking care of ourselves and taking care of the people we serve, that we came to serve.
I love that.
So we need to flip that around. And you start by building what's important to you first.
And what I love about this is it mirrors what you would do when you work with the person. Like
exactly.
You do things that support the development of their own personal strengths and integrity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is part of what I learned about organizations, which I didn't know when I started out 40 years ago, is that organizations, people function within organizations based on the design and structure and relational models within the organization. It really is a powerful way to organize behavior. And if you have a healthy framework within the organization in terms of the relational models and the power dynamics and the policies and the procedures and the processes, it's much more likely that the people working there will perform at their best selves.
Yeah.
And if if the organization is over hierarchic and micromanaged, then, it takes very powerful people to continue to thrive in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
And if the relationship conversely, and this is a big learning for me, if the organization is understructured, right, which is the hippie version of organizations. Oh, we don't need hierarchy. Nobody's boss. Everybody just, then the whole organization starts to become dominated by whoever has the most powerful feelings.
Yeah.
Which is enough unhealthy way to be, which I didn't know that at first. It's like when I look back at the first place I worked, it was a lot of that. So you need healthy structure creates healthy organization delivery, and you create the structure not starting with how do we build structure for us, because a lot of organizations will do that now. It's all around self-care.
Yeah.
Right. So, and the extreme of self-care is, well, I'll be a very happy employee as long as I never have to do anything.
And I can come in when I feel like it because I have a spa appointment or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so you have to build your structure around inspiring service delivery.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if, honest to goodness, if the people working in the organization are inspired by the work, then they need a whole lot less separate self-care than if they're being drained by the work. And it's not the clients who drain you. It's your work environment that doesn't provide you the right context. So you don't know how to feel. You're not naturally supported. You're being expected to do things that you can't do. And that drains you. That burns you out. It's a mismatch between the level of expectation and the level of organizational support and structure. That's the thing that gets you. And so, you say, oh, well, we need easier clients, or we need less work, or we need more time off. No, you need a better environment that helps you do with the people you're working with the inspirational work that you came to do, and help you feel rewarded for it and not frustrated because, not unsurprisingly, the person didn't get better in 2 days. Well, of course not. You didn't come to treat people who are going to get better in 2 days. You came to work with people who really needed you. And the fact that they're coming back to see you again, that's a miracle. Great work. Don't worry that they're still symptomatic. It's okay. And how do you build that structure?
But what I see is, even if the organizational structure is permissive and structured enough and permissive enough to let you kind of do your work in an inspirational way, I find that a lot of people don't know how to be inspired by the people they're serving. They don't realize who they've got in front of them, that they've got a survivor, a warrior, an amazing human being. I mean,
So let me just pick up on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to the original. I mean, obviously in this podcast, we're not going to cover all possible iterations of organizational challenge. We're just going to focus on a few things.
Okay.
But let's stick with the thing I was talking about earlier about using your paperwork and the content of your paperwork or your electronic health record design to pay yourself first, actually, to build your values and stuff into your organization. Well, how do you do that? What do you do? Okay, so let's take what you said as an important question. And I'm going to add one other level of complexity to it, which is I'm an organizational leader. So and I'm consulting to leaders, and I'm helping them and I may also be meeting with their staff. But I don't want the leader to solve all this top down. I want the leader to create an environment where the best possible solutions for some of these questions can emerge.
Perfect.
Which require, not just, up here, we're going to come up with our 40-page plan and we'll let employees give input because that's disempowering.
Yeah.
But we're actually going to build organizational teams that have vertical partnership and multiple perspectives that help us to define core processes in relationship to our values in the best possible way, which is organizational best practice. It's practiced by, like Apple. That's how they get cool products, right? That's what they do. We don't do that in behavioral health. That's like weird for us, because we're real businesses. So let's say that we're in this organization and we're working with really challenged, folks with lots of challenges who need lots of inspiration. We have staff who need lots of inspiration as well. And somebody comes along and says, now it's time for us to design our electronic health record. Okay. And we have some stupid company who claims they know what they're doing. And of course, they're electronic health record techs. They don't talk to people. Right. So they don't know this. But what are we doing if we're smart? Okay. So we say, pay ourselves first. Okay, the electronic health record says it can do our billing, it can report data to Medicaid, it can do all these things. That's wonderful. I'm very happy. But the most important thing that we need is an interface that is inspiring to our staff and clients.
Yes.
Because inspiration, hope, is a much more important product for our organization in the recovery business than billable units. Mm-hmm. We know billable units are important, but hope is the more important product.
Yes. I think if we focus on hope, we'll get the outcome we need.
Right. Well, and if we don't focus on hope and just hope it magically appears while we're doing billable units, we're not going to get to the outcome. So you're saying, okay, well, and the folks we hire, they're good people, but they're not, they're just people, they're not like, they don't have PhDs in hope generation. They're just good folks, they don't get paid enough. And, a lot of them, don't have a lot of life experience. So how the heck are we going to help them be hopeful? So we're sitting there designing this thing. And so the opening screen comes on, which is the tool we give everybody to meet their client. What does it say? Right? It says, and choice A, I'm going to give choice A and B. Choice A, it is extremely important that you fill out every box on this form, because if you don't fill it out, we're likely to have Medicaid takebacks and you could lose your job. So it's really important to ask every question in the order exactly defined on this, and you can't proceed to right. Okay, that's yay. So we've told everybody the most important thing is not the client, it's filling out all the exact boxes in the HR. Or
you are so right.
The screen opens up and says, welcome, inspiring helper. You are about to meet an amazing person who has incredible life experience and is a warrior and is desperate, to meet you, to feel some inspiration and hope.
Oh gosh, wouldn't it be great if that actually happened?
Well, why couldn't it? Is there any rule that says we can't do stuff like that?
No.
Of course not. Do we? No.
I don't think people think about that.
No, that's what we do as organizational consultants. We say, here's some ideas. And then they look at you and say, just like what you did, wow, that would be amazing. And then you go, so are you going to do it? Well, I don't know. Well, does Medicaid have a rule that says you can't put stuff like that in? Well, our staff said it would be much easier if they didn't have to write stuff like that had a lot of feeling crap in it. They just want checklists.
So that's
And so, right, and then you pull people back by the ears and you say, guys, this is what this is about, right? I mean, and you hold people by the hand and try to help them take a few inches forward. I mean, but there are so many drivers in the industry that push people in a different direction. It's really hard to hang on to that.
Yeah.
I'll give you one other. I know you like stories.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you one of my stories
Okay.
about how I did this. Because back when I was running a program in Massachusetts, and we had an inpatient unit, and we had outpatient, we had a crisis program. One of the examples that happened in real time had to do with the need for us. We had just gotten a contract to do the crisis service for Massachusetts, so we were operating the crisis service. So we had set up our little crisis team, and then of course there, it was being paid by Medicaid, and there were all these documentation requirements. And then, it's crisis work. People don't sit around all the time, obligingly letting you fill out all the boxes on the form. And so, people were kind of like desperate because they didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're trying to perform to our contract. We don't want to lose our contract. We don't want to not get paid. But at the same time, we don't want people to do, we want people to take care of the patients first. So basically what I wound up writing a policy, and the policy said to the crisis workers, if something along the lines of, crisis work is what it is, and the priority is taking care of the patient in front of you. And this means that if I see that 100% of all your paperwork is completely filled out, I'll know you're not doing your job.
Right. That's very good.
Okay. Because it's always going to be that there's a certain percentage of people who are so much in crisis that they're running in the parking lot and you just don't get to fill out all the information. And that's not enough. And here's what you do when that happens. Here's how you document those events. And we're going to be looking for that, because if that happens, that documentation is important.
Yeah.
Because that demonstrates that you did your job, and it demonstrates to everybody else what you were doing and why. If we find that half your charts are like that, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Because, we expect that all of you will have a certain percentage of those. And that's normal. And I'm happy to go to bat. I will fight with the contractor tooth and nail that this is an important aspect of crisis service if they want us to do the job they hired us to do. Okay? So this is how we do things. We set up something that helps you to do the right thing in the context of your values and to know how to document accordingly. And my job is to fight battles with the external world. So stupidity is minimally passed along to everybody else. I told my doctors, I never, ever, ever want you to tell me that you're discharging a patient because the insurance company told you to.
Oh, right.
That is wrong. Okay. That is not allowed. Either you had a conversation with the insurance company that could go either way, and you decided it was a reasonable decision, and you decided to discharge the person with a good plan, or you decided that the insurance company was wrong, in which case we will appeal. And I will help you develop the appeals, and I'll fight the appeals, and we'll win some, we'll lose some, but you will never, ever discharge somebody telling me that the insurance company made you discharge them when they needed to stay. Yeah. I don't care what financial, and we were at that point a for-profit entity. And I said, I don't care what the financial hit is, we will not operate that. And you have to, in an organization, you have to take that on at every level. I mean, as a boss, as a supervisor, so whatever. And you can't just say it. I didn't say ignore the rules.
No, you're not saying that.
We don't care if we get paid, because we do.
Yeah.
You have to come up with instructions. Okay, so the instruction is If it's merely a disagreement, that's fine. But if you actually don't agree, then you appeal and you keep the person.
Mhm.
That's the policy. That's our policy.
Mhm.
That's based on our values.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyone who's listening and thinking, well, there's so many external drivers that push us to do things. Every one of those is a decision point. How do I operationalize this so that everybody knows our values and our customers come first,
Mhm.
and our employees operate within those values? And when they do, we will hold their backs.
Yeah. I would call that a values-driven organization. Driven by values doesn't mean you don't pay attention to the rules. But as you're saying, the first step is, how do I approach this problem or the situation in a way that that's informed by my values? My approach
Correct.
is always informed by my values.
Yeah. And in each of those examples that I just gave you, or gave the audience, the easy thing to do is to just step away from it.
Yeah, and that's what happens
Let's say in the first instance, well, record compliance is important. Do the best you can. That's a cop out.
Yeah.
What message have you just given to your employees? Records compliance is important. If you don't complete your records, feel bad. Why?
Yeah.
I don't want you to feel bad.
Right. Getting back to your
I
comments.
want you to feel good.
How can they how can
You
staff
did great work for this person because you took it, right? But that's what we do.
Yeah.
Try your best.
Yeah.
Well, it's a tough situation they're giving us, but do your best. Okay. Well, are we as an organization doing our best to give our people to help clarify what people should do in relationship to values when there's a conflict?
Yeah.
Are we working as a team to develop organizational processes that are about welcoming and hope and inspiration, engaging our folks as partners? I never got to answer the question, why do we write things down? Who's our target audience? And you kind of got at it. The first target audience are the people we serve.
Mm-hmm.
So are we writing down things that help us help them?
Yes.
And then our second target audience is our teammates.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we have no documentation, how the heck are our teammates going to know what to do if something happens with somebody we're helping and we're not there? We quit, we're on vacation, we're sick, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's look after ourselves first.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're looking after the person that way too.
Yeah.
If you've got the right stuff written down, then it reinforces for them what their plan is. They can count on the team being with them, not just one person. So it's
Right.
everybody's best interest. I think we just have to take a new look at how we look at documentation. And
exactly.
Yeah.
Think about in California with Medi-Cal, because I know you're in California. I don't know if everybody paying attention to this discussion knows where you are.
Yeah.
But California, it's a big deal in the specialty mental health Medi-Cal system to document everything and to document quote unquote medical necessity in your treatment plan, because otherwise the Medi-Cal auditors may kick it out, and then your county will have to give back money and everybody will be mad.
Yeah.
So a lot of time people sit and try to write these treatment plans, and the only audience in their mind are the auditors.
Yes.
Because that's how they're trained.
Yeah.
That's the county training people train them that way. The supervisor train them that way. Everybody trains them that way.
Mm-hmm.
But suppose we said the main reason for having a plan is so that you and the client can sit down together and have a great conversation about what the person is working on, why they need it, and how they know when they've been successful. Mm-hmm. Which in auditor language, are medically necessary interventions with measurable objectives, success and targets. Right, but you have to write it in language that the client and you and your teammates understand.
Yeah.
And then you can wrap a bundle around it to help an auditor make sense out of it. But you don't write it for the auditor first, otherwise it's useless.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Ken, every time I talk with you, I love what you say. I go away inspired, and I always have like 1,000 more questions. So I hope you'll come back soon and address a few other things that I know we're all dealing with.
Well, I'm always delighted to spend time with you, Lori, as you know. And so I'm not making any any promises about when I will return, but
Okay.
at some point
Okay.
when the cycle comes around, as it inevitably will,
Yes, okay.
we'll have another
I just have to
conversation.
say this. I know you don't want me to say this, but I'm going to say it. So, my friend Ken has written one of the most amazing books I've read about recovery, and I've read a lot of books about recovery. I mean, the authenticity, Ken, in that book, and the way you talk about families and people being served is just so touching and heartwarming. And I know it's not ready to be published yet, but I just want to say when it gets published, uh, the world is going to be a better place. So.
Well, I will, I mean, I've just provided it to a publisher and now they're kind of trying to figure out how to massage it to what they want to publish. I think it's going to be fine. But if and when we ever get to the point where it actually gets published, I'll be happy to come back on your podcast and hawk my book.
Okay. Well, if you can do that, but even if you just talk a little bit about what you've got in there and what it means to you, that's what's so moving about the book.
Well, I'll wait a little longer till I know what's going to stay in there after we're still like just at the beginning of this process, and you publish books, so the publishers have their own ideas about what they think is important.
Yes, I know that. Well, thank you so much.
All right, well, thanks, Lori. Give everybody a hug.
Yeah.
Back at the ranch.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it from Dr. Ken Minkoff. He hasn't changed much over the years. He's the same amazing, interesting, and provocative guy. And I know so many of you love him, and I do too. But, I want to just leave you with, again, something that Ken brings up. And it has to do with, he starts off talking a little bit about self-care. And how now so many of us are so into self-care that we kind of forgot to focus on the person because we're so busy taking care of ourselves. He says this tongue in cheek, so when I repeat it, just put your tongue in your cheek so you'll know how to hear it. But he talks about how we have this idea that the people we serve drain us. They're so draining, and we talk about secondary trauma, and we have big words for all this about how draining they are and how difficult they are to work with. And that little conversation Ken and I had around this, and around if we could just see these folks for who they are. These are people that have survived unbelievable circumstances. They're warriors, they're heroes. But when they sit before you, they look like beat up, hopeless, helpless individuals that don't inspire us. So our job is to look beyond that, to look beyond what we're seeing in that moment, and look with our soul, and look for their soul, and see the person that's there. When we truly see that person, that warrior, that survivor, we have to be inspired. We have to be interested and want to believe in their strengths and curious about how they survived. And then if we're doing paperwork, we want to capture that in our paperwork. We're not just doing a checklist to meet an auditor's requirement, but we're really we're present and meeting that person on a soul level. And that's where the healing takes place. And that's what keeps us from getting burned out. You can't get burned out when you're on that level. So I'm just reiterating some of what Ken had to say and encouraging all of us to get in that space when we're with the people we serve and see them for the incredible beings that they are. Okay, well, that's enough for me, and good to hang out with you again. And I'll see you next time. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.